Stonehouse Heritage Group. This week has seen the village of Stonehouse reliving its historical past when it stages what will be the largest exhibition ever shown within the village, illustrating and reliving a past of one of Scotland's oldest parishes, dating back to prehistoric times. Stonehouse Heritage Group was established in September 1991 to preserve the wealth of knowledge and history that is held within the village. It is our aim that this information and pictorial material can help to educate future generations of children to learn and understand how previous generations of villagers lived and worked. Through this and future exhibitions of this kind, we hope we will encourage others to retain the character of the village, which still possesses many of the features which have endured the progress of time. We also hope that further information may come forward after visiting the exhibition and that this can be used for further exhibitions within the village. This exhibition is mainly centred round the turn of the century, and most of the photographs are of this period. Half a mile to the west of Stonehouse probably stood the Standing Stones. On this sacred ground stood a monument to the religion of the time run by priests called Druids. This original site was probably chosen by an Ninian, as it was a local meeting. Since the beginning of time, the earth has consistently undergone change. Earthquakes, floods, ice ages and droughts, to name but a few. Whatever the change may be, the earth records it. These records are there for all to read, if you know where to look for it. In Stonehouse, if you want to know about the distant past, simply take a walk down by the banks of the Avon. Here you will find rocks and stones that will tell the history of Stonehouse. Sandstone, limestone, ironstone, shale, slates, coal and even fossils. These simple fossils became important to the people of Stonehouse, providing work. Within the parish of Stonehouse were found sandstone quarries, ironstone mines, oil shale mines and most recently coal mines. The coal mines provided most jobs, with over 200 working at Canderrig Colliery. This pit was situated just outside Stonehouse, and the remains can still be seen today. The pit was closed in 1908 and moved towards Netherburn. Avon. There are no lakes in the parish. There formerly existed at a place called Goslington a large marsh, the resort of wild geese, ducks and other waterfowls. But this land has since been drained off and converted into meadow ground. The only river that runs through the parish is the Avon, which at its source was on the confines of the Ayrshire, whence it takes an eastern direction, flowing through the parishes of Straven, Glassford and Stonehouse, where after being joined by the Kype, the Canderwater and other small streams, it turns to the north, passing through the parishes of Derserf and Hamilton, falling into the Clyde a mile east of Hamilton. The Spectaclee Falls is also a place of rare beauty. These falls are situated close to the hamlet of Sanford on the Kype Water, which is the largest tributary of the River Avon. Wordsworth has described the banks of the Avon as a fertile region green with wood. Even today, the Avon has survived the advancement of progress and still retains the beauty and character it has enjoyed for centuries. The River Avon to this day enjoys many rare plant species along its banks. The herb Paris and the lesser wintergreen are just two of these. These plants can be found on the shady banks of the Avon. Quoting Robert Naismith, tracing your roots. Have you ever thought who your ancestors were, where they lived, what their occupations were? These are just some of the questions that could be answered if you consider tracing your family tree. The number of amateur genealogists has grown rapidly over the last few years. This can be seen by the number of family history societies that have emerged and how the busy New Register House in Edinburgh has become. New Register House is the place to go once you have done some initial investigation. In 1991, Stonehouse Heritage Group went about compiling the 1891 census information from microfiche film, which is held in Hamilton Public Library. It is hoped in future years they will be able to compile the various census information years back to 1841, so that in future years the people of Stonehouse will be able to find out their ancestors through reading the records which are now compiled on computer. It is also hoped that children of the village will be able to compile family trees from this information, and that they will be able to hold this information for future generations. Trades. Stonehouse was far from being just a weaving community in the 19th century. The village had a thriving community, which was in many ways self-supporting. There were many occupational trades, such as blacksmiths, millers, lime burners, masons, carpenters, carters, joiners, grocers, drapers, shoemakers, tailors, publicans and farmers. Agriculture. In 1851, 30% of the male employed population worked directly in agriculture. There were still more people, men and women, engaged in farming than in textiles and mining put together. In the 18th century, decline. Weaving was not a staple industry in Stonehouse until the mid-17th century. In 1772, it is recorded that there were 131 weavers in the village. At this time, the materials were produced for a customer or market, and would be cotton, linen or wool, in a plain weave with perhaps a simple pattern or check design. The weaver would depend on his womenfolk to help him prepare the raw yarn and for weaving by dressing and spinning and the threads. Looms improved and designs changed over the years, improving the quality of the materials produced. Later, the invention of the jacquard machine changed the style of weaving dramatically by enabling the weaver to produce fine, intricate patterns in the material. In the 1830s, there were approximately 500 weavers in Stonehouse, but with the increase in power looms, the handloom weavers declined in number, and by 1841 there were 400 weavers recorded in the village. As the pay became poor, the work scarce, the weavers had to turn to other work in agriculture or the mines to supplement their income. Sons of weavers no longer joined their fathers in the trade and found jobs on farms, mining or the railway. At the turn of the century, not many people took up weaving as a trade, and after World War I, only a few older weavers remained. As fashions changed, demand for silk material dropped, and the weavers closed down one by one. It is believed that the last two weavers in Lanarkshire were Robert and James Hamilton, who lived in Cymnethan Street. They stopped work in 1939. In the early 1800s, weaving became more and more popular as a means of livelihood, and at its peak the weavers were prosperous, enough to own their own property. Streets of privately owned cottages were built, for instance, in Hill Street. The first types of houses built were stone flagged floors, cost approximately £45 to £60 each. The repayments being only The first types of houses built were stone flagged floors, costing approximately £45 to £60 each. The repayments being only a little more than the cost of rent at the time. The houses were usually one-storey terrace cottages, with the front door opening directly onto the street. Through the door there would be a stone flagged entry, with a door to both the left and right, one leading into the living quarters and the other leading into the weaving shop. Access to the attic was by a ladder from the main entrance and was used of the Reformed religion. In 1560, Scotland was divided into 5 districts, over which were placed superintendents to look after the spiritual interests of the people. A number of parishes were combined and placed under the charge of a minister, and under him a class of probationer-styled readers, one being appointed to each parish to read common prayers and scriptures, until times a suitable minister could be found. The first reader in the parish of Stonehouse was William Hamilton in 1560. The Covenanters, James Thomson of Tanhill. Stonehouse has a strong connection with the Covenanters. James Hamilton of Kittymuir and James Robertson of Hazeldean were both executed for their beliefs, but probably the most known Covenanter to most of us is James Thomson of Tanhill, who fell at Drumclog in 1679. He was later buried in the old churchyard of Stonehouse. The inscription on his tomb reads, "Here lies or near this Ja Thomson, who was shot in a reencounter at Drumclog, June the 1st, 1679, by Bloody Graham of Claverhouse, for his adherence to the Word of God and the Scotland's Covenanted work of the Reformation." On the other side, "This hero, brave, who doth lie here, in truth's defence did he appear, and to Christ's cause he firmly stood, until he sealed it with his blood. With sword a hand, upon the field, education in Stonehouse." In the absence of authentic records, it is difficult to say when the first parish school was established in Stonehouse. At the beginning of the century, the schoolmaster's dwelling house was the present small house number 44 King Street, and the school was the house further up the street. A number of children attended, but what we think nowadays if our children were compelled to attend such a low-roofed, ill-ventilated, earth-paved educational establishments as then existed. This was probably the first school built for the parish, and it appears that prior to this the school was merely rented. This building was erected in 1781, and the school and schoolmaster's house cost £40. The next parish school was built around 1808 in Boghall Street, with room in 1882 on the opening of Townhead Street School. January 9th, 1882. This morning at 10 o'clock, the splendid, commodious, neat and comfortable new Townhead Street Public School was opened by the school board. At 10 prompt, General Lockhart and his lady and Miss Dunn drove up to the gate, receiving a hearty cheer from all the scholars. Then came 2 gentlemen of the school board, and awaiting to meet them were M. Smith the architect, J&J Hamilton the joiners, Park the builder, Brown the painter and Riddle the plumber. There were 186 scholars present, and all got erected at a short distance from the old one in the year 1853, and it was enlarged in the year 1870, and enclosed with a neat wall. A house was built for the teacher, near the free manse, and called Suckery Cottage. A subscription school was erected about the year 1806, and a new one erected near it about 1856. This school was Greenside Infant School. A free church school was erected in Hill Road and opened in the year 1851. and was continued by the Congregational till the year 1880, when it was disposed of under the Free Church of Scotland Schools Property Act 1878 and became private property. The new Education Act of 1872 produced quite a revolution in the education affairs of parishes. The School Board of Stonehouse acquired Greenside School, formerly the Subscription School, and converted it into an infant school. The board also rented Hill School from the proprietor for 1 year, intending to build a new school. But in Stonehouse, as in so many villages throughout Scotland, social life and entertainments arranged almost entirely by voluntary organisations. As transport and leisure facilities were irregular and few, there were many numerous social activities within the village, all of which were very well supported. In general, the Victorian working class child had far less time for play than his 20th century counterpart. Until 1863, young children could be employed for up to 12 hours per day in factories. Even after the 1872 Education Act, many children continued to work part-time, leaving few moments for leisure. For the children of the more affluent families, there would be long hours in the nursery playing with handmade toys of this period. There were few of the parish, it is hard to say, but it may have been practised by this and surrounding parishes for a long period. A fresh impetus was imparted to the game when a club was formed in connection with the Royal Caledonian Curling Club of Scotland. The scheme was formerly to play with 8 persons on each side, 1 stone each, but then changed to 4 on each side with 2 stones each. Stonehouse Bandstand originally stood in Kelvin Grove in Glasgow and was built for the 1911 exhibition of Glasgow. Bought by 4th District Council from Glasgow in 1924 for £125 and later converted into a tea room in 1965. The bandstand now commands a panoramic view of the Avon Braes. Pipe Band. The pipe band in Stonehouse was formed around 1899. The founder member was a man called Hector McInnes, who played the bagpipes, and his 2 sons were drummers. They formed the foundations of the band, and it grew steadily from there. They practised originally in Townhead Street School. They were a competing band, and their most notable success in 1909 was when they became world champions. They were presented with a Harry Lauder Shield and the Argyll Shield. This was undoubtedly their most successful period. Stonehouse Male Voice Choir. Towards the end of 1935, in George Wilson's workyard in Green Street, Stonehouse, a few of the employees would gather together at lunchtimes and sing. They enjoyed this so much that they decided to try and start a choir in the village. A meeting was held in the public hall on the 10th of January 1936, and the Stonehouse Male Voice Choir was formed. There were 26 members originally, all of them local men. The conductor, Robert Chalmers, was one of the original group of men who sang in the workyard. Stonehouse Silver Band. Stonehouse Silver Band was formed around 1901 to 1902. The band were self-supporting and relied on subscriptions and fundraising events to raise money to buy music, instruments and uniforms. The early years of the band were spent giving local concerts and fundraising events. Throughout the war years, they gave concerts for wounded soldiers in the hospital. They were a competing band and were very successful from 1919 right through to the 1920s. In 1919, they won the Scottish Championships, and their trombone player, James Chalmers, was the first. The present Stonehouse Lantern was established in April 1991 by Stonehouse Youth Forum, funded by Hamilton South Community Education. The Lantern was originally established to promote and inform the residents of Stonehouse of the involvement of the Youth Forum within the community and to attract the Stonehouse Lantern. The present Stonehouse Lantern was established 1991 by Stonehouse Youth Forum, funded by Hamilton South Community Education. The Lantern was originally established to promote and inform the residents of Stonehouse of the involvement of the Youth Forum within the community and to attract further support. The first copy produced was called The Forum. Shite, I went on to the wrong paragraph. I went on to the wrong one there. Go on to the third paragraph.
No, let's start again.